The movie begins with a group of people digging in the middle of a barren desert. They are extremely exhausted from all the digging. Suddenly, they spot a poisonous snake. We see one of the men take off his boots and walk toward it. The others try to stop him from getting any closer, but he remains determined and continues walking toward the snake. When he reaches it, he puts his feet near it, and the snake bites him. He immediately starts screaming loudly in pain. Now we move to the second scene. There is a young boy named Stanley Yelnats IV walking down a street when suddenly a pair of shoes falls on him. Then we see a police car chasing Stanley as he runs away. Eventually, the police manage to arrest Stanley for stealing the shoes. Stanley tries to explain what happened, but the police refuse to listen because the shoes belong to a famous and very expensive basketball player. The police take Stanley Yelnats IV home and hand him over to his parents. His father, Stanley Yelnats III, comes out, along with his grandfather, Stanley Yelnats II. We learn that everyone in the family has the same name, with only the number changing from generation to generation. Stanley's father is trying to invent something that will help people get rid of bad foot odor. However, when the police want to enter the house to search Stanley's room, his grandfather refuses to let them in. The police insist and enter the house anyway. During the search, they find a picture of the same basketball player whose shoes were found in Stanley Yelnats IV's possession. This makes the police believe that Stanley really did steal the shoes. Later, the whole family gathers around the dinner table. The old grandfather explains that the reason all these bad things keep happening to their family is because of a curse that has affected them for 150 years. According to him, the curse began with their ancestor, Stanley Yelnats I. The grandfather says they need a good lawyer to get Stanley IV out of prison. However, his father says they cannot afford a lawyer. The mother interrupts them and says they don't need one because Stanley IV will tell the truth, and surely the judge will not punish him for something he didn't do. Now we move to a new scene at the courthouse. The judge calls out the name Stanley Yelnats, and the grandfather, father, and son all stand up at the exact same time because they all have the same name. But the judge clarifies that he wants Stanley Yelnats IV. The judge tells Stanley that he could send him to prison without feeling guilty, but there would be no real benefit in doing so. Instead, there is a place in the middle of the desert called Camp Green Lake. This is the same place we saw at the beginning of the movie, where the men were digging holes. The judge explains that the camp is supposed to build character in young offenders. He gives Stanley a choice: either go to Camp Green Lake or go to prison. Stanley chooses not to go to prison. The judge then sentences him to 18 months at Camp Green Lake, a camp located in the middle of the desert. We see Stanley arriving at the camp and meeting the person in charge. The camp supervisor tells him that every day he will be required to dig a hole of a certain length. He also warns Stanley to be extremely careful of the poisonous and dangerous snakes, because many of them can kill a person within seconds. The supervisor explains that the purpose of digging is to make the boys into better people. He also tells Stanley that nobody can escape from this place because there is no water or food in the desert. And if someone tries to escape, they will most likely be eaten by wild predators. After that, Stanley meets Dr. Pendansky, who starts giving him information about the camp. He warns Stanley and tells him, stay away from the warden of this camp. We then see Stanley going to meet the other boys in his tent. They all use nicknames instead of their real names. They start asking Stanley what he was arrested for. He tells them, I was accused of stealing the shoes of a famous basketball player. Later, we see Stanley and the other boys sitting around the dining table. Stanley asks one of the boys a question. This boy is the youngest of them all, and his name is Zero. Stanley learns that Zero has not spoken to anyone since he arrived at the camp. But suddenly, Zero says to Stanley, the shoes had an X on them. Everyone is shocked and surprised because Zero can actually speak. Stanley tries to fall asleep, but he cannot. He starts thinking about what his grandfather told him about the curse that has affected their family. His father, Stanley Yelnats III, had failed with all of his inventions because of the curse. Even his great-great-grandfather, Stanley Yelnats I, once made a fortune in the stock market, but his fortune was stolen by a woman named Madame Zeroni. She took the chest containing all his wealth and left him stranded in the desert for 16 days without food or water. The next morning, they wake the boys up at dawn so they can start digging. Stanley takes his digging tools, and the supervisor comes over to teach him. He tells Stanley, if you find anything valuable, you'll get the day off. Stanley begins digging while thinking about the curse his grandfather told him about. The curse that began with his ancestor, Stanley Yelnats I. Now we learn the story of Stanley Yelnats I. He lived in a small village where he saw a beautiful girl and fell in love with her. He went to her father to ask for her hand in marriage, but he was told that another man had already proposed to her. The other suitor had offered expensive gifts, while Stanley Yelnats I had nothing to offer because he was poor. Stanley then went to a fortune teller to find a solution. When he arrived and explained his problem, the fortune teller gave him a small pig and told him, every day carry the pig up the mountain, let it drink from the lake, and sing the song I gave you. When the pig grows up, give it to the girl you love as a gift." The fortune teller also warned him, "You must come back to me. If you don't return, a curse will fall upon you and your descendants." Stanley did exactly what she told him. He carried the pig up the mountain every day until it grew large, and then he gave it to the girl he loved. But when the girl saw the pig, she started comparing Stanley's gift to the expensive gifts offered by the other suitor. This made Stanley extremely angry. He decided not to marry her. He then left the village and traveled to another place. However, he never went back to see the fortune teller. From that day on, the curse fell upon Stanley and his entire family because he had failed to return to her. Now we return to Stanley at Camp Green Lake. After finishing his first hole, his hands are covered in cuts because he is not used to digging. Dr. Pendansky tells him that there used to be a lake near the camp and that a village once stood where the camp is now located. The grandfather of the camp's warden was named Mr. Walker, and he owned half of the village. Dr. Pendansky begins telling Stanley the story of the town. He explains that there was once a beautiful woman named Catherine who lived near the lake. Catherine worked as a school teacher and taught the local children. A young man named Sam was in love with her. Sam sold onions for a living and was always helping Catherine. At the same time, Mr. Walker was also attracted to Catherine, but she never showed any interest in him. One day, Walker asked Catherine to go out with him, but she rejected him. This made Walker extremely angry. What made him even more furious was discovering that Catherine was in love with Sam. Walker decided to get rid of Sam, so he burned down the school where Catherine worked. When Catherine found out what had happened, she ran to the warden for help, but the warden refused to help her. Instead, she discovered that they were planning to kill Sam. She was devastated and immediately ran to warn Sam. Meanwhile, we see Sam on his boat in the middle of the lake. They reach him and open fire, killing him. Sadly, Sam dies, leaving Catherine heartbroken. After that, Catherine decides to take revenge on the people who killed Sam. The first person on her list is the warden. She comes up with a plan, goes to him, pulls out a gun, and shoots him. She continued taking revenge on everyone who had played a role in the death of her beloved Sam. She also began collecting a huge fortune from them and burying it somewhere in the desert. Before she took her own life, Mr. Walker went to her and asked her where she had hidden the fortune, but she refused to tell him. After that, Mr. Walker spent years digging in different places across the desert, trying to find the hidden treasure, but none of the holes he dug led to anything. Eventually, the search was passed down to his granddaughter, who is now in charge of the camp. We learn that this is the real reason she has the prisoners digging in this area. She's using them to search for the enormous fortune. But despite all their digging, they still haven't found anything. Now we return to Stanley Yelnats IV, whom the other boys have nicknamed Caveman. Stanley is actually very happy with his new nickname. While digging one day, Stanley finds something that looks like a small metal object. However, one of his friends takes it from him and claims that he was the one who found it, just so he can get the day off. When he hands it to Dr. Pendansky, the doctor gives it to the camp's warden, Ms. Walker. Ms. Walker is very excited about the object and decides that everyone should dig in the exact spot where it was found. They continue digging in the same area for several days, but they don't find anything. Later, we see Zero, the youngest and fastest digger among them, asking Stanley to teach him how to read and write. Stanley agrees and starts teaching him. As the days go by, the two boys become close friends. Zero eventually tells Stanley his story. He says, "I used to live with my mother, but one day she went out and never came back. Since then, I've been alone, and I just want to find her." After that, Zero decides to help Stanley with his digging, but this makes the other boys at the camp angry because if Zero helps Stanley will finish his hole faster and get his day off. They become angry with Stanley and start beating him, but Zero stands up for him and defends him. Everything that happened eventually reaches the warden, Ms. Walker. When she discovers that Zero has been helping Stanley dig in exchange for Stanley teaching him how to read and write, she orders every boy to dig his own hole. She also forbids Stanley from teaching Zero. This makes Zero extremely angry. He refuses to continue digging and attacks Dr. Pendansky after the doctor mocks him and calls him stupid. Zero then escapes from the camp. The next day, Stanley decides to help Zero. He steals the camp's water truck so he can take water to Zero and help him escape. Unfortunately, the truck falls into a hole. Stanley then decides to escape into the desert on foot without any water. He keeps walking through the desert until he finally finds Zero. Stanley is incredibly happy to discover that Zero is still alive. He tries to convince Zero to return to the camp, but they change their minds when they notice a mountain shaped like a pair of fingers. Stanley remembers something his grandfather once told him about his great-great-grandfather, who had been stranded in the desert but survived because he climbed a mountain shaped like fingers. So Stanley and Zero decide to climb the mountain. However, Zero becomes extremely weak before they reach the top. Stanley decides to carry him on his back and continues climbing until they finally reach the summit. When they get there, they find water and are overjoyed. They drink as much as they can and also discover onions. which they eat to satisfy their hunger. Then Stanley starts singing the song that his great-great-grandfather was supposed to sing, the song that the fortune teller had taught him. Suddenly, something strange happens. The curse on Stanley's family is finally broken. We realize that Stanley has unknowingly done exactly what the fortune teller originally asked his great-great-grandfather to do: climb the mountain, drink the water, and sing the song. And this time, Stanley and Zero have completed the task together. Here we learn that Zero is actually the descendant of the fortune teller, and his full name is Hector Zeroni. Meanwhile, Stanley's father finally succeeds with his invention, a special substance that gets rid of bad odors from shoes. At this point, Stanley Yelnats IV starts feeling like he is finally lucky. Zero then confesses to Stanley and tells him, "I was the one who stole the shoes. When I heard the police car coming, I dropped the shoes and ran away." The shoes ended up falling on Stanley, which is why he was arrested. But Stanley tells Zero that everything happened because of fate. After that, Stanley and Zero decide to dig in the place where they found the metal object. They start digging, and after a long time, they suddenly discover a chest. But at that moment, Ms. Walker arrives with the camp supervisor. When she discovers the chest, she becomes extremely excited. However, there are many poisonous lizards surrounding the chest, so they are forced to wait until the lizards leave. Suddenly, Stanley's lawyer arrives because Stanley has been cleared by the court, and she has come to take him home. But Ms. Walker tries to justify the situation, explaining that Stanley and Zero are trapped in a hole surrounded by poisonous lizards and that they are in serious danger. She then claims that Stanley stole her chest. However, Zero tells the lawyer that this isn't true because the chest actually belongs to Stanley, and Stanley Yelnats' name is written on it. The lawyer decides to take Stanley and the chest with her, but Stanley refuses to leave Zero behind. The lawyer asks for Zero's file, but she discovers that the camp destroyed his records after he escaped because they believed he had died. This allows Zero to leave with Stanley. Stanley returns home with Zero and the chest. When they open the chest, they discover that it is filled with gold and treasure. Both boys become extremely wealthy. Zero also manages to find his mother and reunite with her. Later, Camp Green Lake is shut down, and all the children who are being held there are released. Stanley's family and Zero's family become wealthy, and they eventually live in large villas next to each other. They live happily ever after, without any more suffering or hardship. And with that, the movie comes to an end. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friend. Thank you for watching.